Our interview took place inside the Keg Mansion. A century ago, it was Euclid Hall, home of the wealthy and powerful Massey family, and where the murder victim Bert Massey lived for a short time. Let's talk about the victim in this case, Bert Massey, who comes from the Massey family, well known in Toronto at that time and still today. You really could have just written an entire book about them.
I wanted to talk about the Masseys because although, particularly if you live in Toronto, sure, you know that name, but you know Massey College, you know Massey Hall, you know Hart Hall at the university perhaps, you know this wonderful old Massey mansion on Jarvis Street. But you don't necessarily know where the Massey money comes from. Why is the name everywhere? And I don't think people realize that the Masseys began and developed and built up what became the largest agricultural implement manufacturer in the British Empire. It was huge. And I also wanted to explore a family where the dynamics were complicated and not particularly attractive.
Family dynamics exposed after Bert Massey was shot and killed on his doorstep by his maid, Carrie Davies. She alleged he was making sexual advances. Although the book is nonfiction, you won't find Davies in the history books. Why did you pick her story to tell?
Carrie Davies was at the very bottom rung of the social hierarchy in Toronto in 1915. And we never would have ever heard of her, and we wouldn't know anything about her had it not been for the fact that she fired a gun and killed her employer.
Gray pieces together the crime and the murder trial, so sensational it often overshadowed the daily stories of the First World War.
The press at the time paid an enormous amount of interest in this case because they could see that it was sort of really juicy. I mean, it was the Rob Ford scandal of its time, and that they could really pick up readership if they could pitch their story right. So there were 6 newspapers in Toronto at that point, and 2 of them, the Toronto Star and the Telegram, went head-to-head on this case. The Star sympathizing with the Masseys, the Telegram, or the Telly as it was known, sympathizing with Carrie. And it's all about commerce. It's all about sales. It's all about selling more copies.
Gray used newspapers and court reports for information, but lacked one key element, a personal account from Carrie Davies herself. How did you find that voice for Carrie?
All I could do was rely on the 3 times in the public record where she is being interviewed. One was in during the initial investigation, one was while she was in court, and one was an interview with the Toronto Star after the verdict. And at that stage, I was able to sort of hear the rather plaintive voice of a young woman who she's in shock.
The trial was held at the Toronto Women's Court on the 2nd floor of Old City Hall. After a 3-week trial, Davies is found not guilty of murder, a decision that reflects that time in our history.
She was acquitted because, in fact, the judge decided she should be acquitted. And so, although it was the jury, 12 men, all old enough, carefully picked by her defense attorney, to make sure that they were all old enough to be her father, and they didn't identify with the victim. Although it was up to them to decide whether to find her guilty or innocent, the judge made it so plain that he thought she was a good girl who just made a terrible mistake and that she should not be judged guilty, that they just followed his lead. And it was shocking to me, actually, because she shot a man in cold blood.
Carrie Davies' descendants declined to be part of the book, but after it came out, Gray had an encounter at a book signing.
And at the very, very end, there was a rather shy woman who came up and leant across the table to me and said, "I'm Carrie's granddaughter." And her mother had died, and she had read the book, and she had decided to come to the reading. And I was so thrilled and flattered that she had come.
The book isn't just about a maid and a murder. It's a historical account of a rapidly changing Toronto at the turn of the century, all of it by design.
I set out knowing I wanted to write about this particular period in our history of a century ago, and looking for a true crime which could sort of become the front of stage action, if you like, and then I could fill in the background of all the sort of social movements and dramatic developments in our past, all of which had a huge impact on the Carrie Davies case, on the Massey murder. And so it was a technical challenge to fit the jigsaw together, but it was also great fun because I knew I had to keep the reader sort of ploughing ahead, wanting to know what happened to this poor kid who'd blown away her employer, but also, incidentally, I could explain so much more about our country and our world.
What a sneaky way to teach people about history.
Sneaky but effective.
Charlotte Gray's book, The Massey Murder, has just been shortlisted for the RBC Charles Taylor Prize. Publishers submitted more than 120 books for this year's $25,000 prize. The winner will be announced on March 10th.